Good evening and welcome to the Justice Factor. I'm Sally Burdett, in for Justice this evening. He's on holiday. He's back with you next Monday. Coming up tonight, we discuss top stories with our editor and analyst in studio. Then our main interview is with National Police spokesperson Solomon Mxolisi. We'll ask him what they were thinking when they appointed Bethwel Zuma as Gauteng's new police commissioner and who they're planning to choose now. And as usual, we'll end the show with our winners and losers. But let's begin with our big stories this week. Jacob Zuma finally names the new head of the National Prosecuting Authority, Mxolisi Nxasana, and he's got his work cut out for him. He's the man in charge of making sure we prosecute more criminals. But will he tackle the elephant in the room? His predecessor, Mokotedi Mshe, dropped corruption charges against Jacob Zuma in 2009. Is the new NPA boss finally going to decide whether Zuma is charged or not? Are we heading for a vicious strike season? Some analysts say post-Marikana, relations between employers and their workers are at their lowest point ever. And South African troops fighting rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, it may be under the banner of the UN this time, but can our government really justify getting involved in a conflict nearly 4,000 kilometers away? To talk about these stories and more, City Press editor Ferial Haffajee and Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, political analyst and deputy vice-chancellor at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us in studio tonight. Let's talk about the new NPA head. Tinyiko, do you think he's got what it takes to bring more criminals to book?
Well, he certainly doesn't have much against him. What we know of him, which is very little, doesn't tell us that there's anything against his name. I think that he has the basic qualifications. He has the criminal, investigative attorney's experience. So he has the basic requirements. Of course, we can't know whether he will do more than his predecessors, whether he has the courage to do the things you are hinting at, we don't know. But certainly I think he is as good an appointee as any, insofar as there is no blot against his name, apparently.
Ferial, your thoughts on not only the new head of the NPA, but also the head of the Special Investigative Unit, Vasoni. Do you think these men have what it takes to do the courageous thing?
I think the nature of where our criminal justice system finds itself at means that these are two incredibly hot seats. Both of them have been going through a serial number of appointees. It's a very difficult place to be, to keep it independent. Two previous heads of the NPA have shown why. I got my head smacked when I prejudged issues when the announcements were made. So I think we have to give people a chance. But the nature of the politicization of the officers, I think, are going to make these very, very tough appointments. On Advocate Vasoni, Acting Judge Vasoni, I've said, I think, that he was the first, he gave post-apartheid South Africa's first gag order, and as a journalist, it's a little bit hard for me to get over that.
And do you think in less than a year before the elections, either of them is going to move to look at possibly bringing up corruption charges against the man who's just appointed them?
I think that the spy tapes are still going through the court. Are we going to have them? That's the first step. And personally, I don't think we're going to see that ended ahead of the election. There's just a number of hurdles, a number of filibustering steps that have been put in the way of ever getting to see those. I don't think it'll land on their desk before the election.
Tinyiko, let's talk about strike season. Some analysts are saying relations are at an all-time low, particularly post-Marikana. What are your thoughts?
I think there's a bit of truth in that, but we've got to remember that relations between employers and employees are always suspicious. By their very nature, they tend to be oppositional. Employers have what workers need, and workers have what employers need. So there's a general understanding that such is the relationship. What seems to be true, though, is that the mechanisms that have been in place until now to deal with bargaining are not are not in a good place. They seem not to be working at the moment. Whether it is just Marikana, that has caused that, I am not so sure. But NEDLAC, all the mechanisms that were there to try and plan ahead for these kinds of things that we see don't seem to work. The gap between rich and poor in the country is another factor. The gap between the salaries of the bosses and the salaries of workers, between the salaries of the union bosses and the salaries of workers. All of these things make up for the difficulties that we see in the negotiations around strikes and wages in this country.
Ferial, on the surface, it looks like an outrageous demand to say, I want a 40% increase, I want a 60% increase. Those are some of the demands that workers are putting on the table. Are those unrealistic expectations fed by bad union bosses, or do you think it's actually a fair thing to ask, given the huge disparities we do see in pay in our country, as Tinyiko has just suggested?
Hell no. I mean, I think things are tough. I think petrol price increases impact working class people far more than they do us middle class people at all. Food price increases outshooting inflation costs. I'm surprised that we don't see more of it. I was interested though at the weekend to read, I think at the Mail and Guardian, that Andrew Levy and Associates saying that actually this is how it is every time in a strike season, but undoubtedly I think Marikana has radicalized the NUM, and we are likely to see a mine workers strike perhaps even as soon as this week. But I can see why employers and bosses would feel double digit to be very high, but when you just look at your own pocket, multiply that in a working class home, and I think you understand the pressures.
Let's move on now to the Democratic Republic of Congo. We've got some 900 troops there. What are we doing in getting ourselves involved in a civil conflict that is really going nowhere? I mean, it's hard to find out what exactly is going on in the DRC with the M23 rebels. It's a difficult conflict to get involved with. Why are we involved in a conflict 4,000 kilometers away and we're paying for it?
Yeah, I think it's a very costly war, but costly in more terms than just monetary. I think it's important to think beyond the rands and cents here. I think, we are being a global citizen. I think that would be the answer that comes from the side of the state. We are being a global citizen. We want to serve the world in the UN. We have ambitions in Africa as a country. We're an extremely ambitious country. We want to have influence, to have a role, and not to be seen to want to come only when there is a party, that we go even when there are problems. The DRC is an important country in that part of the world. We have established relations with it for some time now. It all started with Madiba trying to intervene those years ago with Mobutu, you'll recall. So there is some track record of our involvement there, but war is something else, as you are hinting at. But I don't think we can afford to have the ambitions we have and then fold our arms when there are problems as a country.
We've got to walk our talk. Ferial, I know you want to talk about Syria. It's a big issue. It's a very complicated issue. Zuma today saying that nothing should happen in terms of reprisal strikes for the chemical weapons attacks unless it's under the ban of the United Nations. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I've just been reading Robert Fisk, perhaps the finest commentator, and he says it's going to be the most ridiculous war to ever get into for America. Many people are questioning the US's motives, and unless it doesn't happen with the broad base of, under the broad umbrella of the UN, I do think we're going to sit with another Iraq and Afghanistan sort of intractable continuing wars.
Thank you so much, Ferial, Tinyiko, for your views this evening. We appreciate it. Coming up after the break, it's our Newsmaker interview, and we'll ask the police what on earth went wrong with the appointment of Bethel Zuma. Stay with us.
News that moves. ENCA.com.